Hello all, we're back on Gelvin Valley here, continuing the harvest field number 22. And I know for a couple of videos here I've been kind of complaining about my tractor here, this New Holland. The cruise control works, but when I try to direct drive it limits me to, I think, 11 miles an hour or some slow speed. And so I think there's something I did, and I believe it has something to do with drive control. And you can't really see it. Maybe you can see where my mouse is. I think there is a gas limit, a gear limit, and the two of them combined, I think, result in a slower overall speed when I try to direct drive. So a part of me was wondering, how do I take that off? I mean, I suppose that's a good realism feature, but I'm not really sure how it works. So I had to discover which mod it was in, and as it turns out, I think it's drive control. So let me see if I can get out of game real quick. All right, give me some cash. So this is the mod desk XML file. Every single mod has one of these, and this is the one for drive control. And it has gear limiter up, gear limiter down, gas limit up. We see it's left shift key right, key left, and key up and key down. So I must have been pressing on the shift key up or down or left or right. And I think that's how this needs to be fixed. And I don't think, like, when I have the F1 key, if I go back in game, I don't think it tells us that. So when I open that up, I don't see anything that says left shift up or down or right or left will impact this. So let me just see if I can do it. I'm going to hold down the left shift. I'm going to press, aha. There, I see that turn to 100 down there. Now I'm going to do the up key and get rid of the gas limiter. Ah, ha, ha. There we go. Yeah, you can move that up or down. So as soon as the combine gets offloaded here, I'll take over manually and see if we drive a little bit better. Man, look at these colors. It's just getting better and better as we head into the evening. Love it. And of course, with all the twists and turns in the field, the combine's going to take forever and a day to do what it needs to do. Maybe I'll just try to help. Back up a little bit and get it going again. We can do that. Alright, so it finished offloading. Now that I've changed that back to 100, I'm just gonna, well, of course it's hard to tell. I'm headed uphill. Let me head downhill. Yeah, there we go. Woo! Oh dear, I gotta be careful on these hills. Yeah, this is now behaving normally as you'd expect it. So let me terminate that. I think he's still on the combine. So that's kind of just a little tip. I don't know if a lot of people realize that you can, the help menu in game isn't always going to tell you every control. And frankly, if it did, I mean, the drive control mod is just huge. Just huge. You can already see on the drive control we have four-wheel drive activated, front and rear differential lock. So, if it were to put up in here commands for all of those, I mean, this list would span pages sometimes. So I get it, they don't put all of those in there, but Sometimes, something goofs up and you have to figure out which mod is impacting your particular vehicle or whatever, and how to undo whatever it was doing. And for any commands that may not be listed in the F1 directory, you can always look at your individual mods and look in the mod description XML moddesk.xml file, because inside there's a section that shows all the input bindings, and it'll tell you exactly how to tweak them in game. That is, unless you have already changed them in game. You're always allowed to, when it's properly set up, you can change the input binding to something else that suits your fancy. Yeah, I'm finally under 10,000. Slowly getting my cash back and forcing these fields to pay for themselves. This field, bought it this last go around after this last harvest. This and, oh, what was the other one? Field number 38, which is on the other side of the valley, closer to the home place. We'll be going there at some point. But I purchased both of them. Both of them were full-on grass, so first order of the business. Well, I say full-on grass. It had grass around the edges, and it still does. But in the middle, I think the premise was it was grazed off, so I couldn't take any grass off. I basically had to come in here with a chisel plow and rip it all up. And I didn't show this part. I didn't start recording videos kind of until this harvest, and probably if anybody has suffered through all these videos now, they're probably getting sick and tired of seeing wheat harvest, wheat harvest, wheat harvest. Well, yeah, this is just kind of how I play the game. I just log it out and take it through to the end. So eventually we'll be out of harvest, at which point we'll, head into baling and whatnot. But one of the things that I've done, I think I mentioned we had the rock spawn mod in here. So when I was, it has, the way the mod was designed, it has, I think, 5 settings for rock pulling out of the ground. And basically, if you have a chisel plow or a regular plow or a cultivator, it will bring rocks out of the ground, just like it does in real life for those things. But the way the mod was set up is a player can choose to turn it on or off, and then there are 5 different levels you can cycle through for just how many rocks will burp up out of the ground. And maybe I'll talk about this in more detail too later when I'm ripping up ground. But basically it gives the player a choice, not that you have a choice in real life. The rocks are either going to be there or they're not. But a lot of times it depends on the style of implement you're using as to how it brings up rocks. I know in the farm fields where I worked as a kid, there was a lot of, there wasn't that much plowing. It was a high clay type soil. The dirt was really cloddy and rocky, and it just didn't work, with a moldboard plow type setup. So a lot of times what the guys would do is come in with a chisel plow, just some deeper shanks, if you will, that they would run through it, maybe even a couple times. And it's amazing what kind of rocks some of those things could dig out of the ground. Things you just wouldn't imagine. I mean, you'd look at those shanks and you'd look at the size of the rock that came out of the ground and wonder how you didn't break the thing. And you could break shanks, while you were doing that, particularly if the operator made the mistake of backing up with the chisel plow still in the ground. That was a sure recipe to bust something. But as long as you were heading forward, you could go through a lot of stuff, and your shanks would be okay, and it was sometimes amazing, what they would peel out of the ground. Some massive rocks that you never would have imagined. But anyway, in game here, I used a type of chisel plow to rip this up, I don't I don't really have the patience to do it with a moldboard plow. And honestly, when it's a steep hillside, maybe someone could say in the comments, I don't know how much plowing people do on a hillside. That seems more something you would do on the flat. Although I have seen some and heard testimony of people, that do it on the slope. Oh dear, are you going to refuse to move? I think you are. Let me help. I'm happy to help. We just got to get you reoriented here. There we go. So when I dug this out the first time using a type of chisel plow, I decided to have, I think, a medium level of rocks. A lot of times, at least in my experience, the land where my family farmed, it was so rocky. But a lot of times, a lot of the major rocks would be on the hills themselves. And I don't know why that was, but you'd have a hillside you'd farm for years and it would just keep burping up rocks over time as you work the soil. Sometimes the flatter ground, not in all cases, sometimes the flatter ground was a little more rock free at lower elevation. It all depended on where you were. But I figured for in here, if I had those shanks and a chisel plow of sorts to rip them out, then I would set up some rocks. But then when I came over it afterwards with a regular old cultivator, then I didn't have any rocks come out. I figured the shanks on the cultivator were a little smaller, so they wouldn't be digging quite as deep, and so I opted not to have any rocks come up. And I have another mod, by the way. Maybe I'll just take this moment to show it. It isn't. Oh, except I didn't mean to do that. Let me hit P, get in the store, go to mods. It is a my mod. Maybe it's in the cultivators. Yeah, here it is. Uh, I don't know how to pronounce that. Lametris. It's a roller which we had back on the farm. Not this particular variety, but we had these heavy. I don't know if they're cast iron, steel, whatever they are, rollers. A lot of times we'd have them following the planter, um, just to kind of help smooth the soil back over after planting. Sometimes it would come behind a cultivator, where it's kicking up clods and you want to kind of smooth out the field to get it ready for planting or to help bust up some of those clods. So pulling a heavy roller over it, was helpful to bust those up. But a lot of times, with a planter, if you got those pesky rocks still in the field, you know, it was grass seed that we farmed, and I think I've described in a previous video. Before harvest, you windrowed it, and with the windrower, it was a self-propelled windrower where you'd come along and had a header with a full-on sickle in those days. And those sickles, I mean, knew how to find rocks. And if you have too many rocks just lying around in your field, it may not harm the grass or whatever that's growing around it. But if your sickle finds it and you bust a tooth, well, then you just cost yourself time, when you really don't have much time during harvest. So a lot of times these rollers would follow the planter and they were big enough and heavy enough, they would just take certain sizes of rocks and just beat them into the ground and just smash them into the soil. So it would kind of just remove the problem. I mean, the rock would be there, it'd be dug up again the next time you work the field, never fail. But at least for the moment, it was out of the way of your harvesting equipment that would come in during the summer. Now, it wouldn't do that with all rocks, of course. There was a certain size over which, it just bounce over it and it wouldn't do anything. But what I did is I wrote a script and I put a trigger right along the edge of these rollers and basically said if it was a certain size of rock in game, that it would catch it in these triggers, and to kind of simulate pushing them into the soil, I just made the rocks disappear. So if they're small enough, as we run it over the fields, you'll hear a little tink as it hits the roller, and then the rock just disappears off the map. I guess the presumption is that it's pushed it into the soil. So this isn't my mod. I just kind of downloaded it and used it to put a script on it, and I kind of like it. It's been kind of fun. I can maybe show more how it works the next time I rip things up in here and dig some rocks. I think traditionally the roller type, once you got to Farm Sim 17, rollers were used to undo the field texture, if you will, or to return the texture to its base. So underneath this field right now, for example, is the color green. It's grass, whatever. So, and I just ripped it up, so it's going to show all the soil textures, but really underneath it would show green. So in Farm Sim 17, if we dragged a roller over this, it would return the field to the green. Well, I don't think there's an equivalent in Farm Sim 15. So the roller mods that you would tend to see, and there isn't a roller that comes with the base game. The roller that you would see as a mod, I think, would put out a cultivated texture, when you took it over the field. And this one does too. I had it off for a while. I was thinking, I like having additional things to do in the field, so I figured, well, you could run the chisel plow, so you'd have the plow going on. You could run the cultivator, you get the cultivation texture. And then if there's rocks, you could run this roller over the field, and the roller wouldn't change any textures per se, but it would at least deal with the rock. So that's like 3 field operations you could do prior to planting. And that's something, I don't know how it is in Farm Sim 22, if they've made any improvements, but basically every single version of the game, it's been pretty limited what you can do in the fields. You can plow, you can cultivate, you can plant, and that's pretty well it. And I know in Farm Sim 22 they introduced their own kind of rocks, but it isn't 3D object type rocks, which is the ones that I built into the rock spawn mod. It's more a layer, a type of layer. So when I say layer, it's kind of when you look at all these straw windrows, or when you look at the texture for the weed itself over here, this is just a layer on the map. That when the layer is supposed to be there, it looks a certain way. Well, that's kind of what they did with the rocks, I think. The rocks are supposed to be there, the layer appears until the player, does something with it. But other than that, which, I give props to Giants for adding that to the game. That's kind of cool. It gives one more thing to do. I appreciate what they've added, with the lime. I think that came to being in Farm Sim 19. I'm trying to think if the weeds. Yeah, I believe the weeds also came Farm Sim 19. So you have additional operations you need to do, to manage the pH of the soil, make sure it's free of weeds, otherwise your harvest is reduced. So that's really cool that they added that previously. And like with this map I know I've described before, it's set up for the soil mod. So maybe at some point when I gather enough courage, I'll turn it on and just kind of see how it works, because it also introduces weeds and the need to manage the pH of the soil, and you got to watch for moisture for crop growth and all that. But props to Giants for building that in later versions of the game. And there's just more runs for everything. I think starting in Farm Sim 17, you had to literally go over the fields 3 times with batches of fertilizer. And it's just getting closer to matching real life. um, I know on the grass seed farm where I was, I know there was an application of fertilizer in the fall. I know there was one in the spring, so there was at least 2. And when it was planted originally, there also was fertilizer put in at that point. And grass generally being a perennial type crop, it's going to regrow after it's harvested. So maybe for it had 2 applications per year, maybe depended on the year. But so, anyways, I mean, it gets closer to reality, which is nice. I really don't know much about Farm Sim 22, so who knows what bells and whistles have been added that I'm not really aware of yet. But back in 15, we didn't have any of that, so that's why I say I kind of wanted to add rollers, so you just had an extra thing to do in the fields, um, versus just the standard things it allowed you to do. And depending on the farm, I know some farms are, and this game has it too, minimum tillage, or, and actually, you know what? This last harvest, I think what I did is I did no-till on everything except for these new fields. And I don't know if I'll do that again. I mean, if for no other reason than it was hard to see. These I couldn't do a lot of hiring, and it just was hard to tell where the old stubble was versus the new planted texture. So I probably won't do that again, just so I can see. But I know some guys do that in real life. That's pretty handy. But there are other. Wow, look at how white that is. That must be. Oh, I see. It's a light reflecting off of our tractor, from our tractor. But there are some types of farms where there is a massive amount of work that is done in the field to prepare a seed bed for next year, where there's multiple operations that need to be done before you can do it. So, yeah, it'd be kind of cool if we had a few more options in 15, but we don't. And hopefully that's something they'll build in later years, that there'll be different types of implements, and it'll no longer be, well, here's a plow, so you're only going to get one type of texture. If you have a chisel plow, you're going to get a totally different texture or result in the field than you would have versus using a mold board. So it'd be kind of cool to have some different options that way. That was another cool thing. They built it into 17, the version after this, where I think every third harvest you were forced to, I say forced, you didn't have to, but if you wanted to keep your yield up, you had to plow again, do some deep ripping of the soil, if you will, to kind of reinvigorate it. So that was kind of a nice feature to add. And just how realistic that is probably going to depend on the region of the world and the type of farming people do, but it does inject a bit of realism. Since I know he knows how to find a sell point, maybe what I'll do, since I have plenty of space, take this moment to sneak this into the field and get started doing some windrow. Right outside my home where I live, for many, many years, there's been grass seed harvested. It's a pretty common sight here where I live in the Gelvin Valley. But it's interesting to watch them and see how practices adapt and change over time. There's still the basics that are the same. But one of the things I've noticed is in the hay handling, or I say hay, I mean straw. I think I've mentioned on previous videos, a lot of times it was burned. And I live really close to where I grew up as a kid, and watched these same fields, and years ago, these grassy fields, they were burned just like any other grassy field, and I haven't seen it burned anywhere near the home here in years. And so, following the harvesting equipment, there is a crew that comes in. This is something usually contracted. A lot of times the farmers don't have they can't afford a lot of the haying or straw handling equipment. So a lot of times they farm that out to a contractor that brings a crew in that has, a full contingent of equipment to take care of the straw and is super efficient, making the big bales and stacking it nice and getting it all ready. And typically they'll leave it stacked in various piles in the field, waiting for later in the fall. And sometimes it'll sit there for quite a while. I think they try to be careful where they stack it. I've often wondered about the grass underneath the pile. But truth be told, in the middle of the summer, a lot of times the grass here simply goes dormant. We here in Oregon, in the valley in particular, we have fairly wet winters and we have fairly dry summers. So usually somewhere June, hopefully the water spigot in the sky turns off and it just dries up. And it may be a couple months before another drop of rain lands. And so, the grass, it'll take a little bit of that, but then eventually it just says, okay, we're going to go dormant. So even if they do put a stack of bales over a certain spot, it may take quite a bit to literally kill the grass under it. So maybe it works out all okay. But it's something to see. And I guess my point is, I'm coming into this field that isn't even fully harvested yet. And maybe this happens, I'm sure it happens all over the world, but just the quickness, the efficiency and speed with which some of these guys move, just following right on the heels of the combines as they keep up with them. I mean, you look at the field in the morning, like, I live out here in the country, but I still work in town, and I'll see an unharvested field in the morning. And then when I come home, if that was the day that they harvested it, I may see just a stack of bales in the field and wonder, well, what in the world happened out here today? And it's just, the field was harvested and they stacked it all up and moved on to the next one. And I know this has happened the world over. Years ago, the equipment was smaller, so it would take longer in a particular field to do stuff. And it seems like the equipment just keeps getting bigger and bigger and more efficient, more capacity, just can do more and more and more. In some ways it's cool to see. You like seeing the impact of technology continually improving things and making life better for people and able to do more with less. But I don't know, part of it's kind of sad too. I miss the era, when I was growing up when there was just a lot more farms in the area or small dairies. And where I live right now, when I was a kid, there's at least two small dairies. When I say small, I don't remember how many cows they had. It probably was under 100 that they milked. And these two, and they're both gone. And yeah, just kind of just the traditional pattern of getting bigger, 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 which unfortunately may be what they have to do to survive. But it's fun to remember those days. I'd be curious to know what that dynamic is in other nations, if they have the same issue, if you will, or I know there's a lot of laws, or they try to make laws to try to help the so-called family farm, whatever that means, as if it's something worthy to preserve, which I think in concept it is. I think a lot of people would agree with that. There's something about the small family farm working together that, I don't know, pulls on the heartstrings maybe, but the reality is A lot of those big corporate farms are also family farms. They just were smart operators and passed it through the family, and the wealth increased, and now they're big corporations, but they're still, part of a family. So I don't know if that's what people intended, or if it's still the small farm that they want to see kind of in concept, or just what. Or if it's even worth keeping it. It's kind of almost a romanticized ideal. But I mean, let's face it, farming is hard work, and I've seen time after time, and I met people like at university when I was going there to get my accounting degree, where they couldn't get away from the farm fast enough. They hated it, they didn't want to do it, so they chose some other vocation. And, a lot of times I'd look at these people and I'd say, man, I would give my eye teeth to be in your shoes, to have an opportunity to be part of a farming operation, and you're just throwing it away. Well, I say throwing it away. What these guys would do, they would take the money. A lot of times with the farm, you build up a lot of real estate. So they were interested in the money, but they weren't interested in the hard work required to, keep a farm going or what have you. And I guess each to their own. Not everybody's going to like it. It's just funny sometimes in life how mismatched we are with whatever opportunities are. And I don't mean to complain in that. I think I've mentioned in here I'm an accountant, and I get to work with my father. He started a CPA firm, an accounting firm. He did an awful lot of hard work. Oh, you're not going to get out of my way, are you? That I don't have to do. He established a business, established a name in the community, and I get to pick up where he left off and have some advantages as a result of it. So, maybe it isn't even so much a farm, it's a family business where someone expended significant effort and work to build something, and then maybe you'd like to have your children kind of take it too. Maybe it helps validate the hard work you put in. Maybe they even told the kids, I'm doing it all for you, growing up to make a living. I don't know. But there's just a lot of times it just doesn't happen that way. The next generation isn't interested, or even if they are interested, they don't have the same talents, the same dedication or whatever. Maybe they don't care about it as much because they weren't the ones that built it to begin with. So they don't work as hard, or they rest on their laurels. And I know there's statistics out there on that as to the life cycle of businesses and how many of them fail before ever getting off the ground, and those that do make it, the low percentage of them that make it through the next generation, and how many of them die off even by the third generation or sell out. Yeah, there's all those statistics out there. I mean, we serve a lot of small business in our. Actually, maybe I'll just head up here. I can continue windrowing. We serve a lot of small business in our client base, and it's it's all over the board. But then, you'll have, it seems primarily fathers. I realize there are ladies that own businesses too, but traditionally, a lot of times, there's a business built by a father for his family, and it's hard work. There's no denying it. No matter what kind of business you have, in order to make it go and attract customers, it requires dedication, sacrifice, hard work, all those terms that we use practically become cliche, but it's true. And so a lot of times the father or the parent, they don't even want to pass the business off to their kids because they've been so beat up by it, run ragged, had to work so hard. They just assume there's gotta be an easier way out there to turn a buck or to make a living. Well, maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But a lot of times, they will even discourage their kids from taking up the same vocation that they had because they want it somehow to be easier for their kids. And a lot of times that's just flat out a fallacy. It's the reality is it is hard work no matter what you do if you want to have anything of substance. And if all you do is just take the easy way all the time, well, you're not really going to have anything. It doesn't matter what kind of industry you're in. So you have that attitude in the spectrum too, and then there's many others that figure out a way. As we do a certain amount of estate planning and transfer of family wealth, helping some of these families to figure out a way to do it, and boy, it's tough. The emotions just run high, and sometimes I think our job is more psychiatrist, or I'm not sure what you call it, just a counselor to people for, because who knows what comes out of the woodwork when you start trying to put together an estate and you start seeing all these family dynamics coming out of the woodwork. A lot of ugly things sometimes too. Well, you were always the favorite kid and you always had everything handed to you. Now I want a piece. And it's just really interesting, the emotions and the dynamics of people when it comes to splitting up a family estate, the ideas of fairness, and it's just an amazing dynamic of how we are as people when money's involved. Maybe most of us say, well, this isn't about the money, it's about fairness, it's about all these other things, but I don't know, I beg to differ. I think the average human being loves money a whole lot more than they would care to admit. And I know in the Bible it says the love of money is the root of all evil. And it's, yeah, being a corrupt human race, you kind of see all that come out on display. I don't know how I'm talking about all that, but anyway, looking at the time here, I see it's it's already been another half hour, so I hope I haven't bored anybody, but I hope everybody's having a good evening or day, and I think I'll cut the video off there and tell you all good night. Take care. We're almost done with this field.